9 months after we buried my husband, I found a Japanese maple that had never existed. Quiet. It was a beautiful thing on paper. Item 4471. Acer palmatum, 2-meter specimen, burgundy leaf, 12 units received in the spring of 2009. 11 of them sold by the August. $480 each. I remember standing in the middle of the polytunnel with the clipboard against my chest and thinking, well, that was a good year. I don't remember that at all. Then I looked for the 12th one, because if 11 had sold, one was still ours, and a 2-meter Japanese maple does not walk off. It should have been out in the specimen beds with a wire tag on it, 12 years older and worth 3 times the money. Slow. It wasn't there. It had never been there. There was no hole in the ground where it had been, no gap in the row, no record of it dying, no note of it going to the burn pile. There was just a number in a book, and beside the number, in small, neat block capitals, the letters SLD and a date. My name is Winifred. I am 68 years old. For 41 years, my husband Desmond and I ran a garden center on the Ellerby Road, the one with the green sign and the 2 stone urns at the gate that everybody used as a landmark when they gave directions. Turn left at the garden center. Everybody knew it. My husband built it out of a field and a loan and his own back. And when he died in the November, sitting in his chair with the crossword folded on his knee, I inherited all of it. Deep breath. I want to be careful how I tell you this, because for a long time I got it wrong. Not a little wrong. I got it so wrong that I did damage I cannot take back, to a person who did not deserve 1 minute of it. So when I tell you about the maple and the clipboard, and how clever I felt working it out, I need you to hear the shame under it. I was not a detective. I was a frightened woman with a set of numbers she did not understand, and I picked the answer that hurt least, and it was the wrong one. Let me tell you how the counting started. Desmond never wanted to sell the place. He used to say they'd carry him out of it, and in the end, that is more or less what happened. But 9 months on, I was 68, and my knees were finished, and the center was too big for me, and my daughter Bridget was 3 hours away, working nights in an intensive care unit, and could not come and run a till on a Saturday. So in the August, I rang a broker and said, I think I want to sell. The broker was a brisk woman called Miss Hargreaves, who wore trainers to evaluation, which I liked. She said, the land is the land, Mrs. Ward. The land will sell itself. Then she said, but a buyer will want the business as a going concern if the numbers support it, and for that, we need a proper stock take. A full one. Every plant, every bag, every tool, every pot. I said Desmond did a stock take every year. She looked at me and said, when did anybody last walk the site and physically count? I did not have an answer for that, because the honest answer, the one I found out later, was 1997. We started on a Monday in the September. Me and June Farrar, who has run our tills since 1984 and is 71 and sharper than all of us, and Teddy Alvarez, who does the yard and the deliveries and has been with us 22 years. 3 old people and a stack of clipboards, and the young bookkeeper, Callum, at the office computer, to enter what we counted. I should tell you about Callum here, before I tell you what I did to him, because it matters that you meet him the way I met him. Callum Reyes was 27. 3 years earlier, Desmond had put a card in the window of the shop, part-time office help, and Callum came in wearing a shirt that was too big for him and asked if we needed the books doing properly, because he was studying for his accounting exams at the college in Morro Bay, and he needed something real on his record. He had grown up 4 streets from us. His mother Delia works the counter at the pharmacy and has sold me my blood pressure tablets for 20 years. He had a way of standing very straight when he was nervous. Softly, Desmond hired him on the spot and then complained about him for 3 years. Not really complained, grumbled. The boy wants to put everything on the computer. The boy wants receipts for everything. He grumbled the way men do about someone they have decided to keep. Callum tidied things. He nagged Teddy about fuel receipts until Teddy started keeping them in a jam jar. He put the payroll on a system instead of the brown envelopes Desmond had used since the 80s, and when Desmond died, It was Callum who sat with me at the kitchen table for 4 hours and worked out what I had to file and when, and did not once make me feel stupid. So that is who was at the computer that September. Please hold on to that. The counting took 11 days. It is slow, filthy, back-breaking work. You count seed trays. You count broken canes. You count how many bags of compost are actually on the pallet, which is never the number the pallet is supposed to hold. The first 3 days, the differences were what you would expect. A few over, a few under. Shrinkage, June called it, and rolled her eyes. Because half of it was Desmond himself, giving plants away to people he felt sorry for and never telling anyone. Curious. Then, on the fourth day, we hit the specimen trees and the equipment, and the differences stopped looking like shrinkage. They looked like nothing at all. Because the items were not missing. They had never arrived. Here is the thing I did not understand at first, and I want to explain it slowly, because it took me 2 weeks and a very patient old man to understand it myself. When you buy stock, you write it in. 12 maples received. Then, when you sell them, you write them out. 11 maples sold. What is left over is what should be standing in your yard. If your book says 1 maple and you have no maple, that is theft or breakage, and it is a small, ordinary sadness. But our books did not have leftovers. Our books had whole shipments, in and out, clean. 12 in, 12 out. 16 in, 16 out. A ride on mower received in 2011 and sold 9 weeks later for $4,200. Cash. Trade. And Teddy, who has loaded every single thing that has ever left that yard onto a trailer with his own arms, stood in the equipment shed with the sheet in his hand and said, "Winnie, we have never had a ride on mower. Not once. Not in 22 years. We sell push mowers. We don't stock ride-ons. Where would we put it?" Dramatic. That was the moment the floor moved. Because a missing plant is a missing plant. But a plant that was bought and sold and never existed, that is not shrinkage. That is somebody writing a story in the books. And when somebody writes a story in the books, there is always money moving underneath it. I did not sleep that night. I lay there in the dark, doing the sums a person does at 3 in the morning, which are not sums at all. They are fears wearing the costume of sums. If you invent a sale, cash comes in on paper. If cash comes in on paper but not in the till, somebody has taken it. By 4 in the morning, I had a shape in my head. Somebody was inventing whole transactions, in and out, and skimming the difference, and dressing it up as a busy trade counter. And there was exactly one person in that building who knew how the books worked well enough to do it. Sad. I'm going to say the next part plainly, because dressing it up would be cowardice. Over the following 9 days, I convinced myself that Callum Reyes had been stealing from me, and then I acted on it, and I did not once do the one simple thing that would have stopped me. Everything fitted. That is what I would say to you if you asked me how. Everything fitted, and every single thing that fitted had an innocent explanation, and I did not look for a single one of them. He had a new car, a gray estate, 4 years old, not a flash thing, but the last one had been held together with hope. In my kitchen at 3 in the morning, that car became evidence. He had started coming in on Sundays. I could see the logins on the office system, because he had set the system up himself and had shown me proudly how you could see who had been in it and when. A thief who shows you the burglar alarm. But at 3 in the morning, it became a man working when nobody was watching. He had been strange with me since the July. Quiet. Twice I had come into the office and he had shut the laptop, not fast, just shut it, the way you do. Once he had asked me, out of nowhere, whether I was really going to sell, and when I said I thought so, he had gone very still and said, "Right, okay," and gone out to his car and sat in it for 10 minutes. Emphasized, every one of those things had a reason. The car was his brother's, bought in his brother's name because Callum's credit was ruined by a student loan he had taken for his mother's dental surgery. The Sunday logins were his exam revision because he was using our accounts as his practice set with Desmond's blessing, which Desmond had given him in writing, and I never thought to look for. The shut laptop was a job application to a firm in the city because he had a fiancée called Hannah and a wedding to pay for, and he could not live forever on 22 hours a week. And the 10 minutes in the car was a 27-year-old man realizing that the woman he had been quietly loyal to for 3 years was about to sell the only steady thing in his life out from under him without having mentioned it to him first. I knew none of that. I built a man out of coincidences, and then I was frightened of him. On the 10th day, I went into the office when he was at college, and I opened the old stock books. We had two systems, you see. Callum's on the computer, going back to when he arrived. And before that, the real one, the one Desmond used, which was a wall of ring binders and a card index in a wooden cabinet with 48 little drawers. Desmond loved that cabinet. He bought it at an auction of a chandler's in 1982, and he used it until the day he died. He used to say the computer can go down, but a card does not go down. I pulled the cards for the specimen trees. And there it was, again, and again, and again. 12 in, 12 out. 16 in, 16 out. Item numbers, dates, prices, the letters SLD, and a trade account code, T-11. I went to the account ledger to find out who T-11 was. Marrow Bay Contracting, a landscaping firm. Our biggest trade customer, apparently, buying between $11,000 and $19,000 a year, every year, for over 20 years. I had never heard of them. In 41 years, I had never once heard my husband mention a firm called Marrow Bay Contracting, and I had stood behind that counter through 2 recessions. June had. June went white and said, "Oh, they were real, Winnie. Bob Havering's outfit. But love, they went under." That was ages ago. 2001, 2002. Bob had a stroke, and the boys sold the trucks. So there it was. Our biggest customer had been dead for 20 years and had gone on buying trees every spring. Firm. And I looked at all of it, all that beautiful, invented business, and I thought, he found it. Callum found the old dead account when he was digitizing the records, and he saw a customer who could not complain, and he has been posting sales to a ghost ever since, and taking the cash. That is what I told the police. I want you to understand that I did not creep about. I did not gather quietly and check twice. I was 68 and grieving and terrified, and I had just discovered that the business my husband spent his life on had a hole in it, and I went off like a firework. I rang the police on the Thursday morning. Then I rang the broker and told her the sale was on hold because there had been a fraud. Then I rang the accountants, the new ones, a firm in town, and told them the same. Then, and this is the part I would give a great deal to undo, I drove to the center and I waited for him. He came in at 1:30 with his college bag on his shoulder. June was at the till. Teddy was moving pallets by the door. There were customers in the shop, at least 4. One of them Mrs. Dunleavy, who has been buying her bedding plants from us since before Callum was born. Dramatic. And I said, in front of all of them, "Callum, I know what you have been doing, and I want your keys." He said, "What?" I said, "Marrow Bay Contracting. 12 maples, a ride on mower. $23,000 last year alone in a trade account belonging to a company that has not existed since 2002. I have called the police. Give me your keys." Slow. He went the color of putty. He said, "Winifred, win." "What are you talking about?" And then, and this is what I held against him for the next fortnight, he said, "Those accounts go back before me." And I said, "Of course you would say that. You entered them. I want to be very clear." He was right. He said the true thing, the whole answer, the key to the entire business, in the first 30 seconds, standing in a shop full of people with his college bag still on his shoulder. And I heard it as a lie, because a lie was what I had come in expecting. He gave me the keys. He asked if he could get his mug, and I said no. He walked out past Mrs. Dunleavy and got into the gray estate that was not his, and sat there with his hands on the wheel, and after a while he drove away. What happened over the next 3 weeks, I did not do all of it, but I started all of it. The police came, 2 of them, patient and slow, and they took the ledgers and the cards and the computer, and they interviewed him twice, once for 4 hours. Because I had told them a story, and the story was coherent, and a coherent story from a grieving widow with paperwork is a very heavy thing. Marrow Bay is a small place. It got out in a day. Not the details, just the shape. The boy at Ward's, the bookkeeper, cooking the books, police involved. His college heard. They did not throw him out, but they suspended his placement pending the outcome, which meant he could not sit the examinations he had been getting up at 5 in the morning for. The firm in the city that had interviewed him wrote him a very polite letter withdrawing the offer. Hannah's parents asked her to postpone the wedding, not cancel, postpone, which as far as I can tell is the cruelest of the two, because it makes the person wait to be forgiven for something they did not do. And his mother Delia came to my door. Pause. She stood on my step in her pharmacy tabard on a Wednesday evening, with her car still running behind her, and she said, "Winifred, I have known you 20 years. I sold you your tablets this morning. Tell me to my face that my son is a thief." And I said, "I am sorry, Delia. The numbers are the numbers." She looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "Then God help you when you understand them." Sigh. And she got in her car and drove away, and I went inside and made a cup of tea and did not drink it. The thing that finally cracked it was not clever. That is what I want you to hear. It was not detective work. It was a wet Tuesday and a box of old cards and a pen. The police had taken the current binders, but not the old cabinet, because the cabinet was full of dead stock from decades ago, and nobody thought it mattered. And the accountants had asked me for the earliest records I could find of the Marrow Bay account, to establish when the pattern began. They wanted a start date. I thought if I could show it began 3 years ago, that would be the end of Callum, once and for all, in writing. So I went out to the office on a wet Tuesday, and I started at the beginning of the drawer, and I worked forward. 2003, there it was. T-11, $1,100 of hedging in the March. 2001. There it was. 1999. There it was. Quiet. 1998. There it was. The first one. April 1998. Item 6112. Hornbeam whips, 240 units received. 240 units sold. T-11, $1,920. Callum Reyes was 5 years old in April 1998. I sat with that card in my hand, and I made myself an argument, because that is what the mind does when it cannot afford the truth. He backdated them, I thought. He went back and wrote them onto the old cards to give himself cover. Clever boy, very clever boy. And then I turned the card to the light. Slow. The sevens had crossbars. My husband crossed his sevens. He picked it up in the 70s from a Dutch bulb supplier, a man called Wim, who wrote his sevens with a little line through the middle, and Desmond thought it was the smartest thing he had ever seen, and did it for the rest of his life. He crossed his sevens on the shopping list. He crossed them on the tags. He crossed them on our anniversary cards. 44 years of a small line through the middle of every seven that man ever wrote. Callum did not cross his sevens. I had his handwriting in front of me on the delivery book. He wrote them like a printed seven, plain. And it was not only the sevens. The whole card was Desmond. The block capitals, all of it capitals, because he said longhand went to pieces when your hands were cold. The little hook on the ones. The way he wrote the letter S, starting from the bottom. And the ink. Green, not blue, not black. Green, because he bought a box of green pens in about 1990 and used them for the stock, and only for the stock, so that stock entries would stand out from everything else. And he was still working through that same box when they discontinued them, and he made me ring 3 suppliers to find more. Gasp. Every phantom entry in that drawer, from 1998 to the year he died, was in green ink and crossed sevens and block capitals. There is a particular kind of cold that goes through you when a thing you have built collapses inward. I have felt it twice. Once when the hospital rang about Desmond, and once sitting on an upturned crate in a cold office holding a card index card written in my husband's hand, understanding that I had put a boy in a police interview room for something my husband did before that boy could read, And then I went up into the loft over the potting shed, where Desmond kept everything he could not throw away. And that is where I found the rest of it. And the rest of it was worse. There was a green cash box under a roll of shade netting, not locked. Inside it were his pension statements from the paper mill, where he worked 22 years before we ever bought the field. Everyone, going back to 1997, in date order, held with a bulldog clip. And beside them, in an old exercise book, in the same block capitals and the same green ink, 2 columns. On the left, a date and a figure. On the right, a date and a figure. Month after month, page after page, 23 years of it. The left column was his pension. The right column was the trade takings from Marrow Bay Contracting. They were the same money. He was drawing his mill pension every month and putting it into the business as cash sales, and to make the cash sales look like something rather than nothing, he was inventing the goods those sales were for. 12 maples in, 12 maples out, money in the till, a dead landscaper's account to hang it on, and, on paper, a garden center that was doing perfectly well. I sat in that loft with the dust coming down through the light, and I understood what I had been looking at all along. It was never theft. It was the exact opposite of theft. Nobody had taken $1 out of that business in 23 years. A man had been quietly pushing his own money in, every single month, for longer than some of my staff had been alive. Deep breath. The why of it took me 1 more week and a visit to a very old man. Raymond Whittle did our accounts from 1980 until he retired. He is 89 now, and he is in the Cedar Lane home with a view of the car park and a mind that comes and goes like weather. I went on a Thursday with a box of the shortbread he likes. I put the exercise book on the blanket over his knees, and I said, "Ray, tell me about 97. And this old man, who cannot always remember his daughter's married name, said, "Oh, Winnie. Oh, love. Has it come out?" 1997 was the year the coastal home and hardware opened out on the highway with a garden department the size of an aircraft hangar. And it was the year of the drought, and it was the year of the hail in the August that went through the glass house and took out the whole autumn stock in 11 minutes. We had put everything we had into the new glass house the year before. Everything, and a loan on top. I remember the hail. Of course I remember the hail. I remember standing at the kitchen window watching it, and Desmond going out into it in his shirt sleeves, and I remember him coming back in soaked and saying, "Well, we'll have a lean year." That was all he ever said about it. A lean year. Ray told me the truth of it in a voice like paper. The center never recovered. Not in 1998, not ever. The loan was secured on the land, and the bank wanted to see the business supporting the loan, and by the spring of 98, the business did not, and the bank would have called it in, and calling it in meant selling the land, and selling the land meant the end of everything, including the 6 people who worked there. Ray said, he came to me in the March, and he asked me what would happen, and I told him, and he said, "What if the trade side was stronger?" And I said, "Des, it isn't." And he said, "But what if it was?" Ray said, "I told him not to. I want you to know that I told him not to." And he said, "Ray, June's got a boy at school, and Marion's husband is on the sick, and Teddy's just started, and I am not going to be the man who tells them." Sad. So he did it. He took his mill pension, which he had never touched, which I thought he had left sitting because he was proud of it, and every month he put it through the till as trade sales. And every year the books showed a business that made just enough, and the bank was satisfied, and the 6 people who worked there kept working there, and then 8 people, and then 11, and it went on for 23 years, because once you have started, you cannot stop. If the phantom trade ever stopped, the books would show the drop, and the bank would ask why, and everything would unravel backwards. So every April there had to be an order of hornbeam whips that did not exist, and every August they had to sell. Ray Whittle held my hand with his cold old fingers and said, "He was not a crook, Winnie. He was a man who could not say the word. He could not say the word." I said, "Which word, Ray?" He said, "Insolvent." Quiet. I have thought about that 1,000 times since, My husband was a proud, decent, stubborn man who got up at 5:30 for 41 years, and somewhere in 1998, he decided that the truth would cost other people their livelihoods and his wife her peace of mind, and he decided he could carry it instead. And he was strong enough to carry it. That is the tragedy. He was strong enough to carry it right up until the day it killed him in a chair with the crossword on his knee, and then he set it down in my lap without a word of explanation. All those things I never understood came back and rearranged themselves in front of me. The way he did the banking himself, always, every Monday, alone, for 4 decades, and got short with anyone who offered. His coat. He wore the same coat for 19 years. He had it restitched twice by a woman in the market. I used to say, "Des, you look like a tramp," and he would say, "It keeps the rain off." The night in 2014, when I found him at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with the calculator, and he said the VAT was due, and I said, "Come to bed," and I went to bed. Emphasized. And the thing he said in the hospital 8 days before he died, which I had put down to the drugs, he was drifting and he took my hand and said, "It was never as good as I said it was." I said, "What wasn't, love?" And he said, "The place. Tell Bridget it was never as good as I said." And I said, "Hush, you're dreaming." He was not dreaming. He was trying, in the only voice he had left, to tell me the thing he had been unable to say for 23 years. And I told him to hush. I sat with all of that for 4 days. And on the 5th day, I had to go and find Callum Reyes. He was living back at his mother's. He came to the door, and he did not ask me in. He had lost weight. That is the thing I noticed. A 27-year-old should not look like that in 6 weeks. He stood very straight, the way he did when he was nervous, and he waited. I had written it all down because I did not trust myself to say it. I gave him the pages, the cards, the exercise book, Ray's statement, the letter I had already sent to the police withdrawing every word, the letter I had sent to the college, the letter I had sent to the firm in the city. He read it standing in the doorway. It took a long time. His mother came and stood behind him and read over his shoulder and put her hand on his back. When he finished, he said one thing. He said, "I told you, in the shop." I said they go back before me. Quiet. And I said, "I know. I heard you. I just didn't believe you." He nodded. He did not shout. I think I would have preferred it if he had shouted. He said, "Do you know what the worst part is? It's that I liked him. Des taught me to graft an apple tree. He came to my grandmother's funeral. And when you said what you said, in front of everyone, my first thought was not even about me. My first thought was, oh God, what did Des do, and how do I fix it before Winifred finds out? He had known. Not the shape of it, not the pension, not the hail. But he had known something was wrong in those books for at least a year, and he had been coming in on Sundays trying to work out what it was. And every Sunday he had decided not to tell me yet, because I had just buried my husband, and he wanted to be sure before he put that on me. That is what the shut laptop was. That is what the Sunday logins were. That is what the question about selling was. Because he knew that if I sold, the buyer's accountants would find it in a week, and it would not be him standing in front of me, explaining it kindly. He was trying to protect me from the exact thing I accused him of. I asked what I could do. He said he did not know. His mother said, "You can start by telling the same number of people you told before." And she was right, and I did. And it does not work the way you want it to. A rumor goes round a town like water. A correction goes round like a wheelbarrow. The college reinstated him, and he sat his exams in the spring, and he passed them. And I know that because Delia told June, and June told me. Not because he told me. The city firm did not reopen the offer. He and Hannah married in the July, quietly, and I was not invited, and I would not have expected to be. He wrote to me once, a short note, on a card with a hedgehog on it, which I thought was a strange choice, until I realized it was probably the only card in the house. He said, "I don't think we can be what we were, but I hope you're all right, and I hope you don't let it eat you. That is more grace than I earned." Pause. Now, the business. There was no business. That is the plain arithmetic of it. Take out 23 years of invented trade, and what is left is a garden center that has not covered its own costs since 1997 and has been kept alive by one man's pension. I told the staff myself, all 9 of them, in the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning with the shutters down. June cried. Teddy did not say anything for a long time, and then he said, 22 years, Winnie. He paid me out of his own pocket for 22 years, and he never once let on. And then he went outside. We closed in the March. The land sold to a developer for a good deal more than the business was ever worth, which is its own kind of joke, and there are 26 houses there now with little gardens, and I am told the 2 stone urns are still at the entrance because the planners insisted. Everyone got proper redundancy. That was the one thing I could do, and I did it. Bridget came home for the closing week. She stood in the empty glass house and said, Mum, I don't think I ever really knew Dad. And I said, No, I think we knew him exactly. That was him. That was the whole of him. He just did it where we couldn't see. I have thought a great deal about whether I forgive him. Firm, I do not think it is mine to forgive, is the honest answer. He lied to a bank for 23 years, and that is a real thing, and I am not going to make it pretty. He lied to me too, every single day, at breakfast, in the car, in bed, and every one of those lies had the same shape. I have got it, love, don't worry. But I also know that if he had told me in 1998, we would have sold the land in 1999, and June's boy would have had a different childhood, and Teddy would have had to start again at 36, and Desmond would have had to look at himself as a man who failed. And I know he decided that carrying it alone was easier than any of that. He was wrong. But I understand every step of how he got there, and there is not one place along the way where I can put my finger and say, there, that is where he became a bad man. The person I cannot forgive is easier to name. I told a room full of people that a boy was a thief because I could not bear the other explanation. That is what I did. Some part of me, further down than thinking, understood on day 4 that a scheme running since 1998 could not be a 27-year-old's, and that if it was not his, it had to be my husband's, and my mind ran the other way as fast as it could go. I did not want a mystery solved. I wanted somebody to blame who was not Desmond, because Desmond was still, in my head, the man who fixed things. Grief will make you do that. It will hand you a villain and a set of numbers and tell you it is doing you a kindness. And here is the part I turn over at night. I had the answer in my hand on the first day. The very first day. Item 4471, on a card, in green ink, with a crossed 7. I had been married to that 7 for 44 years. It was on the note he left on the fridge the morning he died, gone to the wholesalers, back by 7, with a line through it. I read that note every day for 9 months. And then I looked at a stock card in the same hand, with the same 7, and I did not see it, because I was not looking at the handwriting. I was looking at the numbers. The numbers were big and frightening, and they were shouting, and the handwriting was small and quiet, and it was simply sitting there being true. That is what I would say to anybody if I got to say one thing. When something is wrong, the big wrong thing will always find you a villain. It will be loud, and it will fit, and it will let you act, and acting feels so much better than not knowing. But the truth is, almost never in the loud part. The truth is in the small detail that does not fit, the ink that is the wrong color, the date that is too early, the line through the middle of a 7. The small thing does not shout, because the small thing has nothing to prove. It is just there, being the truth, waiting for somebody to be calm enough to notice it. I was not calm, I was frightened, and I was grieving. And I was 68 and holding a business I did not understand, and I chose the loud answer. And a good young man lost a year of his life and a job and a wedding date and the ordinary respect of the street he grew up on, because I would not slow down long enough to look at a letter. I still have the card index. 48 little drawers. The developer's men were going to skip it, and I said no, and it is in my spare room now with a lamp on it, which is ridiculous for a piece of office furniture from a chandler's in 1982. Sometimes I open a drawer and take out a card and hold it under the light and look at his handwriting. 12 in, 12 out. All those years of a man standing at that cabinet in the cold, inventing trees, so that nobody would ever have to know. Softly. And every 7 has a little line through the middle of it. Every single one. He never once tried to hide it. He never disguised his hand, never changed the pen, never varied the capitals. It never occurred to him to, because it never occurred to him that anybody would ever count. He was hiding a bankruptcy from a bank for 23 years, and he was not hiding at all. He was in every stroke of it. The one person who could have read him in a second was in the next room the whole time, making his tea. Deep breath. Check the small thing. Before you pick up the phone, before you say the word out loud in front of witnesses, before you decide who the villain is, go back and look at the quiet detail that does not fit, the one you keep sliding past because it seems too minor to matter. It is not minor. It is the only part of the whole business that was never trying to convince you of anything.